He's John Timpane.
And he's Don Rooney.
And this is
The Musical Innertube.
Now, you may ask, why is this podcast called The Musical Innertube?
And we may reply, because that's its name, of course.
Now, how did this podcast get that name?
Back in college, we hosted a radio show. Once, we tried to introduce a soothing musical interlude.
Instead, we messed up and wound up introducing a soothing musical innertube, and the name stuck.
So here we are, hundreds of years later, still talking
to interesting people about their interesting lives.
Difference makers who really make a difference.
And today we're chatting with Jon Burlingame. He's the nation's leading writer on the subject of music for films and television. He writes regularly for Variety and has also written for newspapers like the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and the Washington Post, and magazines such as Premiere and the Hollywood Reporter. He's the author of 5 books, the latest of which is entitled Music for Prime Time. It's a history of American television themes and scoring. It is a fantastic book. I recommend it highly to everyone. Jon Burlingame, welcome to the Musical Innertube.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
We were just talking before we started recording about all of the music from television that we as baby boomers went through when we were kids. When I was reading your book, I said all of those themes popped immediately into my head when I read any of the titles on there. 77 Sunset Strip and Cheyenne and Gunsmoke and all the other ones. Why do you think, and again, I remember those better than I remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, but why do those themes stick in our heads like that?
Well, there are a number of reasons. The most obvious one is the week-to-week repetition, and particularly of shows that we loved and watched regularly, combined with the rerun factor. Let's face it, Gilligan's Island was only on the air for 3 years, but it has rerun endlessly ever since. And if you don't know that theme backwards and forwards, you have somehow managed to miss a huge moment in pop culture history. So it's the endless repetition combined with the fact that, particularly in that era that you're talking about, which is late 50s, throughout the 1960s and into the 70s, many of these themes were written by very talented composers, some of which came out of Tin Pan Alley, some of whom came out of the movies and were writing high-quality music for motion pictures, and then some we just discovered along the way who understood the need to capture a mood or a vibe within 60 seconds.
That's interesting because we talk about earworms today, but these are brainworms. These they were so good at what they did. And I think we can talk about that a little bit. Is they were good. They only had like a minute, maybe even less, maybe 30 seconds at the beginning of a show to hit that theme. And still today, I'm walking down the street going, Kathy adores a minuet, the ballet russe and crepes. You know what I mean? Why is that there?
Sure.
I don't want it there. Well, I don't care if it's there or not, but it's so, I don't want to even say catchy. It's more than that. It sort of just moves in and stays.
This is the thing about both television and film to a certain extent, which is that when great music is married with memorable images, it becomes something else. Particularly, as I say, it's not just an earworm, it's a brainworm, to use your term, because we remember very often, not just the tune, but we remember the imagery that accompanies it. Somebody asked me the other day if I had a guilty pleasure or a guilty pleasure favorite theme. And I had to think about it for a minute, but it came out of the woodwork, as all these things do, which was My Mother the Car.
Yes.
Which was, I don't know if either of you remember the show.
Oh, yes.
It's now gone down into, pop culture history as arguably the worst show in the history of the medium. But that tune.
I remember the theme, yes.
And it was Follow the Bouncing Ball because they actually reproduced the lyrics on screen during the main title. 1928 Porter.
That's my mother, dear.
A 1928 Porter. That's my mother, dear. She helps me through everything I do, and I'm so glad she's here. My mother the car. My mother the car.
I do remember that.
So all of these things, talk about a tune that you don't necessarily want to pop into your brain at any particular moment.
Right.
But it did this morning on walking the dog, while I was walking the dog. And so there you go.
Right, exactly. I don't know why, but, and it must say something about me, but I just don't know what it is, that the music, both the theme music and the situational music used in Clutch Cargo, which only ran, I think, for one season, I think, 1959 to 60. You know, these things where they basically used still art with moving mouths.
Yes.
In a very odd sort of, yeah, I don't know. A couple of cartoon
very
shows.
scary.
Yeah,
Yes.
it was weird.
Yes.
But that music, I'll be singing when they throw the dirt on me. It's
Clutch Cargo and his pals Spinner and Paddlefoot in another exciting adventure, The Friendly Headhunters.
The technique was called Synchrovox.
Okay.
And although I watched Clutch Cargo, I was really enamored of its outer space sequel, Space Angel.
Yes.
Yes.
Blast off for another exciting adventure in outer space with Scott McCloud, Space Angel, in the story of The Cosmic Combat,
Which was the science fiction show that followed by the same producers.
Yes.
And I was obsessed with Space Angel in 1963 or
Oh,
64. And so that's the theme that I actually remember. I think Clutch Cargo had bongo drums because there were so many jungle settings, but that's, I could be wrong.
Now, these themes obviously
We've already, by the way, alienated all of our listeners.
Yeah. Except for the 5 that are sitting now with that bongo Clutch Cargo theme in their head right now. Anyway, these themes obviously are set to make an impression on you right away and to set the table, so to speak, for the show. Once you get through the theme, you have an idea of what you're going to be seeing in the next 30 or 60 minutes. So, and I would say that I guess music, scattered throughout the show does the same thing. It's kind of like, I guess they call them music cues because it sort of lets you know what's going on, whether it's thrilling or comedic or whatever. So, there's a lot of thought that goes into even the smallest piece of music that winds up in a TV show.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's one of the reasons that, the publisher wanted to call the book not just a history of TV themes, but also TV themes and scoring, because I tackle both parts of the sort of musical equation in my book. Music in television accomplishes essentially the same thing that music in films do, except faster and generally with less money to pay. For the composer and the musicians and everything. And so, but music is an integral part of that storytelling process. It can set the tone. It can, put you in a time and place. It can, certainly in the case of sitcoms, tell the backstory via song lyrics. But it can also provide a kind of emotional bed. It can sort of help us feel whatever the filmmakers are striving for us to feel at that moment. And so it's a big job for a composer in television, particularly when you've only got 3, 4, 5 days to actually write music that, in a film context, you might have been given a month.
I recall a story. The gist of it was that Sherwood Schwartz was selling Gilligan's Island to the network, and he was having trouble with it because they said, how can we reestablish the fact that these people are stranded on a desert island every week? And he said, well, let the theme do that. And the implication there was that the theme sold the show. And again, that's another one that I can recite from heart, that I can sit in the shower and sing the whole damn thing all the way through.
Well, goodbye, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to end this episode of the Musical Innertube right now.
Well, Don, that's exactly right. That's exactly what happened. I actually talked to Sherwood Schwartz about that specific meeting that you're talking about. And I tell that story in the book. Sherwood, the CBS executives, were skeptical about the notion of, suppose somebody tuned into at week 3 or 4, how would they know how these 7 stranded castaways wound up on this desert island? And Sherwood's idea was, we'll tell the backstory in a song. And although it became somewhat different than Sherwood's original concept, because Sherwood, who was a kind of amateur, piano picking out a note at a time player, had written a calypso. And when he took it to his composer friend George Weil, George said, wait a minute, the calypso is from the Caribbean. You need a sea chanty if this is going to be a South Seas island. So he took the lyrics and basically set them to a brand new tune that was something more of a sort of a rollicking sea chanty, and hence the song that we all know.
We all know right down to our shoes.
Just sit right back and you'll hear a tale of a fateful trip that started from this tropic port aboard this tiny ship. The mate was a mighty sailing man, the skipper brave and sure. 5 passengers set sail that day for a 3-hour tour. A 3-hour tour. The weather started getting rough, the tiny ship was tossed. If not for the courage of the fearless crew, the minnow would be lost. The minnow would be lost. The ship's aground on the shore of this uncharted desert isle, with Gilligan, the skipper too, a millionaire and his wife, the movie star.
And we all know, of course, that it was different between seasons 1 and 2 and season 3 when they added the Professor and Mary Ann, because in the first couple of seasons it was and the rest, and then somehow I guess it became popular enough to put the Professor and Mary Ann as part of the original theme.
Well, I had to believe that the agents got involved in that one. After season 1, it became the Professor and Mary Ann.
Yeah, there's a completely different song at the end, a completely different set of lyrics to see, and I think the end of it is, come on back next week to see what happens to the castaways. But it's a completely different set of lyrics for the end, over the ending credits.
Now this is the tale of our castaways. They're here for a long, long time. They'll have to make the best of things. It's an uphill climb. The first mate and his skipper too will do their very best to make the others comfortable in their tropic island nest.
No phone, no light,
no motor cars, not a single luxury. Like Robinson Crusoe, it's primitive as can be. So join us here each week, my friends. You're sure to get a smile from 7 stranded castaways here on Gilligan's Island.
Yeah, that's right. And in this case, what you're talking about is, although Sherwood never admitted to it, the model at that point was actually the Beverly Hillbillies, another CBS show that told the backstory in the main title and had a slightly different song performed also by Flatt and Scruggs under the end title visuals. And so, come on back next week and see what happens next.
Again, I can remember that one. Y'all come back now here. Okay.
That's
It's it. Well, let's talk about composers other than Sherwood Shorts. There were a lot of big names in flipping through the first few pages of your book, a lot of big movie names that had come to television to do scores. Were they slumming? Was there not enough movie work left, or did they actually feel like television music was worth doing?
It depends on who you talk to, really. Victor Young, who was a major film composer in the 1930s and 40s, actually did Medic in 1954. That was Richard Boone's first show, and it was a medical drama. And Victor Young wrote a great theme and actually something more than 30 individual scores for those half-hour shows. This was the first instance of a big movie name coming to television. But Max Steiner, who was, of course, perhaps the biggest composer of that era, Casablanca, King Kong, Gone with the Wind, was approached when he was in his declining period in the 1960s to do music for Hawaiian Eye because he was a Warner Brothers standard over there. And he was mystified by the fact that they wanted him to establish a mood in 9 seconds. And he did write a handful of very small pieces, but never got screen credit for it. So if you're watching Hawaiian Eye, you might accidentally stumble into some Max Steiner tunes. But when you talk about big names, really, so many people that became big time movie composers actually started in television. When you think about Jerry Goldsmith, some of his early themes like Dr. Kildare, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., and he sort of, and perhaps the biggest name of all was John Williams, who was basically not just obscure, but totally unheard of when he started in television in 1958.
Yeah, I think
he did 7 years.
Your book says his original name was Johnny Williams, or that was his original credit.
Well, if you look at old episodes of Lost in Space, or my favorite Private Eye show of his, Checkmate, or even M Squad, the old Lee Marvin cop show, that'll say music by Johnny Williams, and he eventually became John Williams.
And I think the most nominated person for Oscars, Biggest Loser, right? I think he's lost 35 times. He's won a couple times, but
he's won 5.
5, right.
And that's right. But he has 50 some nominations, I think. I wouldn't call him a loser in any sense.
In any sense at all. But didn't Elmer Bernstein write the music for things like The Big Valley and things like this? I think Bernstein, and he wrote a lot of documentary music. He was a presence. Obviously, he would write for anybody's birthday party. I mean, he was really a busy guy and kept busy.
My daughter's turning 7. Can you come over and play the piano?
What time you want me to have?
You're absolutely right about that, John, because and he was, frankly, when he came to television in 58 to do the General Electric Theater, and then in 59 to do Riverboat and Staccato, he was already a big name, having done the 10 Commandments and The Man with the Golden Arm at that point.
Yes.
But didn't think of it as slumming. To these guys, it was a fascinating new arena for music making that did require you to write faster and get paid less money. But and we don't talk about this much, but there's actually an enormous back end payment. There are royalties and residuals that come back to the composer, particularly on a successful show. I remember talking to the late Gerald Fried, who was perhaps is best known for Roots, and I asked him, what is, it's none of my business, of course, but I couldn't help but ask. He'd done so much television in the 1960s, whether Star Trek, which he had worked on in the 60s, was his biggest revenue stream. And the answer was no. It was Gilligan's Island, because those shows rerun everywhere, all the time, everywhere in the world. And he had done, maybe, I don't know, probably 20 of them, but they just rerun constantly. And he made a fortune off 10 and 20 second cues in Gilligan's Island.
Gerald Fried has passed away recently, just within the last month or so.
That's right.
And the obituaries all said, he's the guy that wrote the Mr. Spock theme in Star Trek. That, the one that kept, every time there was an exotic fight with an animal or something. You could have said he did music for Roots, which was a very prestigious show at its time, and people would have said, "Oh, that's nice." But the minute you put in, and he did the Spock fight theme in Star Trek, everybody went, "Oh, that one, yes, I know that."
That's exactly right. And the episode was called Amok Time. And that was the episode where, Spock went back to Vulcan and he was going to be, mated with another Vulcan, and there was all kinds of, anyway. So, but Fried, being a, clever and and dramatically astute composer came up with music that worked for that particular fight. And who could have known, in 1966, that would have become iconic in the history of television scoring. And that's been parodied a million times.
We'll return to the musical Innertube in just a moment, but first, this soothing musical interlude.
Jon Burlingame has twice won ASCAP's Deems Taylor Award for Outstanding Music Journalism. In 2014, he received another industry honor, BMI's Special Citation of Appreciation.
Besides writing 5 books of his own, Jon has contributed chapters to other books, including one on Leonard Bernstein and On the Waterfront, on John Williams and Boston Pop's America's Orchestra, and on Elmer Bernstein and Moving Music, Conversations with Renowned Film Composers. He even wrote the chapter on Marvel movie music in the book Marvel Universe of Superheroes.
Find out more about Jon, his career, his books, and his other projects on his website, Jon, that's Jon, Burlingame.com.
And now, back to the musical Innertube, already in progress. When Jon was talking about watching Clutch Cargo, I remember watching a lot of the Hanna-Barbera cartoons.
Yeah.
And they had the same music recycled over and over again. Studios and I guess I could say, if I paid attention, maybe some of the old Westerns and some of those old ones had recurring themes, but that were not limited to that one show. You could hear those themes on several different shows. Was there a whole bank of music that these studios had? And when you're going to score a show, just for the dramatic effect, the fight or the love scene or whatever, you could go into this pool of music and pick something that you wanted?
Well, that's true, but that really pertains more to the 1950s and early 1960s in television history. There was a long period, most of the 1950s, in fact, where producers who didn't really appreciate the value of an original score would rely on libraries, production music as it's known today, which is basically generic dramatic music that they could license and then have access to. For example, except for the theme, all of the Adventures of Superman in its entire run, which is like 8 or 9 seasons, was actually library music, not written specifically for those shows, but actually written as kind of generic dramatic music to be applied wherever a music supervisor or a music editor felt was appropriate. And this went on. In the case of the Hanna-Barbera cartoons, much of that early music was written by the great Hoyt Curtin.
Yes.
The Flintstones, the Jetsons, Top Cat, Johnny Quest, all of that stuff from the early 1960s. And Hanna-Barbera had no problem recycling from show to show. So, if a Jetsons cue seemed to fit for a Top Cat episode, well, so be it, and it was great, I must admit. I worked on an album of Johnny Quest music a few years ago, and I just reveled in that stuff because I loved the show, and Hoyt was given an opportunity there to write action adventure music instead of sort of the lighthearted Flintstone stuff he had been doing. But yeah, libraries were quite popular. And of course, let's get back to the money thing. Producers don't want to spend money if they don't have to. And so if this looked cheap and seemed like it would do the job, then, yes, they went after it.
Okay, so 2 things. The first thing is there are some people recently in the public intellectual sphere who talk about there being too much music in our lives, the ubiquity of music, that you can't get away from it. There's music playing all the time. They're afraid, I think they're wrong, but they're afraid that this demeans or diminishes the role of music in our lives. But, when I listen to some TV themes, I hear music that's very interesting. They may be slipping it in the side door and hoping nobody notices, but it's, there is some very, very interesting music. I even heard, I was watching, what's a good example that you might not think? Oh, I know. So Eva Longoria is doing a series for CNN where she goes to Mexico. And the music for that is lovely. Most of it is for, very small, sort of chamber group with a piano and maybe a string bass and something, but it's just gorgeous. And I'm wondering how you feel about that. Is there too much music? Does music push us around when we listen to TV shows? We talked about how it helps us feel things. Some folks feel that it tries too hard to make us feel things. Like suppose somebody gets a letter in the mail and they're opening the letter and then you hear the bum, 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 bum. So you're supposed to say, oh, something in this, right? Something in this letter is going to be really bad, but you hear that all the time. It's almost a cliche of music that sort of anticipates what they hope you're going to feel. I wonder what you feel about that.
Well, it's another one of these yes and no questions. I mean, music can be a great asset in storytelling. Too much music essentially becomes wallpaper and diminishes its effectiveness when it needs to make an important point. So, the fact is, and I talk to composers about this all the time, as I write about this music for Variety, very often, like on a Star Trek show, if there's 42 minutes of program material, they're generally writing 40 minutes of music for that show. Mm-hmm. And does it need it? Probably not. But this is about how storytelling on television has changed, and their view of music has changed through the years. I can remember Norman Felton, the producer of Dr. Kildare and The Man from U.N.C.L.E., talking to me about Jerry Goldsmith and how they would always think that, less is more. If you don't need music for a certain scene, if the actors are carrying it, if the point is being made dramatically without music, then don't add music. What's the point? It's being redundant to the scene. But if music can add something that the visuals are not telling you at that moment, then it's definitely worthwhile and should be applied. So I was watching an episode of Succession the other day, a show which I think not only has a great theme, but a great score by composer Nicholas Britell. And I was surprised at how little music there actually was in the show. And because the dramatic thrust and the performances were so powerful that adding music would have been gilding the lily to a certain degree. And so, you don't always need wall-to-wall music. And of course, there's actually very little music in most sitcoms. It's generally transitions in and out of scenes. Sometimes there's a button at the end of a scene. Certainly, I remember talking to Gabriel Mann, the composer of Modern Family, about this subject. And he would talk about how, if the family was sort of getting together and everything was fine at the end of the show, well, you might need 20 seconds of sort of warm family music to sort of make us all feel good as we go out, that kind of thing. But it depends on the show, and it depends on the showrunner and with their general attitude toward music.
That's very interesting.
What about using popular music in a show to accent the feelings in it? How I Met Your Mother, Friends, Scrubs, other shows like that would use a popular song or something that sounds like a popular song to sort of close out the end of the episode with words that sort of convey the meaning of whatever's going on or the sort of the wrap up of the show. So what about that?
Yeah. This period really started with Miami Vice in 1984. When Michael Mann came to NBC to sort of launch this, basically a cop show set in South Florida dealing with sort of drug dealers and drug transactions, Michael thought that the use of popular songs, pop and rock generally, sometimes, Latin music, because of course we were in South Florida and very often in the Caribbean, might be a different way to approach the use of music. And so this was sort of the beginning of the music supervision era in television, where you would actually license pre-existing songs that for one reason or another would make a dramatic point. So this really caught on by the late 80s and early 90s. And so music supervisors then became not just in demand, but actually somewhat powerful in terms of their ability to punctuate scenes with popular songs, generally pre-existing ones. Although sometimes new ones would be written for the show itself, which is what I frankly prefer. I think there's no substitute for a song that is written specifically for a scene or as a theme that applies directly to the characters and the story being told. But boy, music supervision is a very big deal today in television because many showrunners believe that songs do help tell the story.
So really, music supervisors are sort of curators, aren't they? I mean, they really have to. It's a combination of they might commission some of the music, and they might go out and find other music. They're basically assembling a body of music for an episode. And I think I know that there are many shows that use pop music to tell the story, especially near the end. One show that does it very well, I think, is The Good Doctor. They use tunes you haven't heard, but really apply emotionally to what you're seeing. The Good Wife did that also. Often about 9/10 of the way through the show, it was sort of a feature, when the whole point of the story was about to be forced. I might also add a lot of the Scando noirs do that very same thing. They get very dark pop music, often sung by waif-like females against a despairing piano. For example, Brone, the bridge has that one sort of chillingly desperate tune, but it's sort of curation. And it is very powerful because it means that the way I feel about the show is going to be not determined, but at least very influenced by the music.
Yeah, a lot of this, I think the popularity of the use of songs now was to a certain degree pioneered in the 1990s and early 2000s by the music supervisor Alex Patsavas, and particularly in shows like The OC and Gilmore Girls, and particularly on Grey's Anatomy. And this is where the sort of the television business crosses over into the record business, because Alex was so good at finding end of episode songs for Grey's Anatomy that very often if she found something that was somewhat obscure or perhaps nobody had ever heard before and she'd put it on, the iTunes would soar the next day.
Yes.
And you would realize that this music was not only being effective in the storytelling of the show, but it was selling records too. And well, everybody loves that because there's more money to be made.
Yes. Yeah.
But Alex, who and I talk about this in a sidebar toward the end of the book about the development of the idea of utilizing popular songs in television. And now it's a whole industry.
And the art of taking the theme song, like the theme from Friends or something like that, and making it a top 40 hit, has also come about in the last few years. Do you think that when assembling a show, that gets into people's heads too? Hey, if we have a theme song that we can then release to radio, that's going to bring people to the show.
I don't think that that's talked about all that much anymore because it is so unusual for a TV theme to become a hit. But it was in the minds of producers long ago, particularly in view of the success of Peter Gunn in 1958-59, and that tune not only went to number one, but that album wound up winning the very first Grammy ever awarded for Record of the Year. And so all of a sudden, everybody thought, "Gee, let's get our theme on the radio," And so the idea was, and then of course, you jump into the '60s and you find record chart success for Mission Impossible and Hawaii Five-0. And Miami Vice in the '80s, and the Rockford Files.
Welcome Back, Kotter.
Welcome Back, Kotter went to number one, and that was a John Sebastian tune. And in fact, the show wasn't called Welcome Back, Kotter until Sebastian came in, played this song, and they thought, "Gee, welcome back. Let's rename the show," which had been called Kotter.
So they renamed the show after the song.
They renamed the show after the song, went to number one, and so so it did happen. Not always, in fact, rarely. But you're right. The Friends tune was very popular on radio in 1995. And Twin Peaks, even an instrumental, got on the radio.
Oh, yeah.
In that early 90s period.
So let's also talk about the demise of the theme song. In the 90s and into the 2000s, you mentioned Modern Family. Modern Family has like a 30-second ha, ha, ha for their theme song. There's not even really a lot of musicality to it. There were obviously the story we've heard is that networks pressured to cut back on the theme songs to have more time to sell commercials. So is that indeed what you heard in your interviews? And what did people who were making music for TV think about that when they were told, okay, you got 12 seconds to do an intro?
Yeah, I remember this very clearly because I was at the press conference at ABC in the summer of 1994 when the head of ABC programming declared that television theme songs were now useless, pointless, and were eating up time that I think, Don, I'm not sure so much it was about selling more commercial time as it was they were desperately afraid in this cable plus network era that people would, since they'd seen the main title once already, the week before or the week before that they would hit that remote control button because they were bored and they were going to go somewhere else. So the network executives, terrified of losing viewers to some other channel, thought, well, what do we need this, 30 seconds or 40 seconds or 1 minute of lost program time for? And what's interesting was, of course, that fall, Friends came on the air with a great, memorable 1-minute theme that went on the radio, and I think it led some people to rethink it. But it is true that trend has continued to this day where, I talk about this in the book, the theme for Castle, which was a 1-hour ABC drama a few years ago. I remember talking to Bob Duncan about writing that main title. He had 7 seconds to make the point. At 7 seconds, you can there's barely a musical phrase in 7 seconds, So, you do the best you can.
I do remember watching that sitcom Wings, and for the first couple of years, it had a nice long open with a Franz Schubert theme. And then about third or fourth season in, it was just a couple of hits on the piano of the Schubert theme, and then we're into the show. So again, that was what got me thinking about shows that used to have great themes that suddenly were rushed along to get into the show.
And what bothers me about watching Cheers in reruns is that fabulous song, the greatest song about a bar ever written, it was about a minute in its original form in the 1980s. But now in reruns, it's cut down to 20 seconds, maybe 30 at most. And I miss that song.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It reminds me of where we are. It brings me back into that wonderful place with those people. And the main title visuals are spectacular. Those sort of turn of the century drawings of people in saloons. There's an art to this. And in fact, I think the television theme is a kind of miniature art form in a way. I think that's never been really given the level of respect it's due.
What do you see for the future? I know you mentioned Succession. That has excellent music. And a lot of the cable shows have some pretty good music attached to them. Do you think we're getting back into an area now where the music is going to be more married to the action and shows are going to be scored more?
Well, I think what gives me hope and what certainly heartens me on this whole idea is the world of cable and streaming, where you're actually paying to watch this channel, and very often you're paying to watch a certain show or two on this channel. So executives are less worried about people flying away to some other place. So you're actually getting some really great, sometimes not just a minute, sometimes a minute and a half, minute and 45 seconds of a especially and often beautifully built series of visuals that bring us back into that world. Think about Game of Thrones, Succession, House of Cards had a great main title, and which not only gives the reminds us of the music, but also reminds us who's in the show, what the show's about. Sort of eases us into that world from our, day-to-day humdrum world.
Sopranos comes to mind too.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. And that's a pre-existing song that was used brilliantly to remind us where we are, along with the visuals.
Well, Jon Burlingame, thanks very much for being with us today. There's a ton more we could talk to.
My goodness, we'll have to have you on again. One realizes just how much one has lived one's life among tunes, and themes and just little snippets of music that stay with you forever and are associated with happy memories a lot of the time.
Yes, and there are usually at least 40 or 50 more songs that we could sing together.
That's right. Jon and Don, thank you so much for having me on. It's been such a joy.
Welcome back. Your dreams were your ticket out. Welcome back to that same old place that you laughed about. Well, the names have all changed since you hung around, but those dreams have remained and they've turned around. Who'd have thought they'd lead ya? Who'd have thought they'd lead ya? Back here where we need ya. Back here where we need ya. Yeah, we tease him a lot, 'cause we got him on the spot. Welcome back. 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 We always could spot a friend. Welcome back. And I smile when I think how you must have been. And I know what a scene you were learning in. Was there something that made you come back again? And what could ever lead you? What could ever lead you? Back here where we need you. Back here where we need you. Yeah, we tease him a lot, 'cause we got him on the spot. Welcome back.
The Musical Innertube is available everywhere good podcasts are found. Listen on your favorite platform and give us a good rating.
You can subscribe to the podcast on our website, musicalinnertube.com.
There you can listen to all of our podcasts, see pictures and biographies of our guests, and contact us. You can even leave us a voicemail.
And I know what a scene you were learning in. Was there something that made you come back again? And what could ever lead you? What could ever lead you? Back here where we need you. Back here where we need you. Yeah, we tease him a lot, 'cause we got him on the spot. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Yeah, we tease him a lot. Welcome back. Welcome back. 'Cause we got him on the spot. Welcome back. Welcome back. Yeah, we tease him a lot, 'cause we got him on the spot. Welcome back. 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 Welcome back.
The Musical Innertube was recorded in everybody's home in front of a couple of table lamps and a sofa.